Hey, Michael with X-Force PC. Want to talk about Radeon 7 performance. I think some of you have been waiting for this. I didn't have high expectations, and well, we'll see how that goes here in just a minute. The cards we tested, these are from NVIDIA, the 2060, the 2070, and the 2080. And then from AMD, the Vega 64, which was the fastest AMD GPU, or graphics card. And then we have the Radeon 7, which just came out in February of 2019 and is now their fastest graphics card. Now, AMD has positioned this Radeon 7 to go head-to-head with the 2080. A couple of things I'll say about that right off the bat is, in general, the Radeon 7 does draw more power than the 2080. It's a little louder than most 2080s. And it's not quite as fast in most games as 2080s, although it is close. So I see why they're comparing them. And they are the same price. So already the 2080 sort of sounds like the better card to get. The one exception might be if you have a FreeSync monitor, you probably get better support out of the AMD card, because FreeSync support for NVIDIA cards is sort of hit and miss. If you don't know what FreeSync is, go Google it and you'll find plenty of information. Now, X-Plane's a different animal. X-Plane doesn't conform to gaming necessarily. So we're going to have to look at the performance there. So without further ado, the two tests that I did triple 1080p, so I had 3 individual 1080p displays, not using NVIDIA Surround, but using them as individual displays. And the other test I did was at 4K. Now, when I did the testing, I used pretty high settings, and I especially went high on the anti-aliasing, so I'll put that up here now. By going high on the anti-aliasing, it increases the load on the graphics card, because I really wanted to see variance between these tests, and by upping the anti-aliasing a little higher than maybe most people have it, should introduce some more variance between the cards. Now, let's put the numbers up for the triple 1080 test. And one thing you'll see right away is the RTX cards. They all got the exact same score. And that's because when you do 3 individual windows of X-Plane and you're using these cards, the bottleneck is the processor. And what tells me the bottleneck is the processor is the fact that I got the exact same score when running 3 very different graphics cards. They are not that close in performance, yet we got the same exact score. So again, on the triple 1080 test, when using NVIDIA, the bottleneck is the processor. Now we go over to the AMD cards, and well, we didn't get very good performance there. The Vega 64 only got 18 frames per second, and the Radeon 7 only got 20, whereas the NVIDIA cards got 37. 37 is a very playable frame rate. You know, anything over 25 is acceptable. You'd really like to stay over 30. So 37 is very acceptable. Anything below 20 is completely unacceptable, because the sim runs actually in slow motion. Once you go below 20 frames per second, the flight model doesn't work right. So there's some work to be done here. The promise, I don't know if it's a promise, the hope is that Vulkan sort of fixes this. Ben, I believe I heard him allude to the fact that if you have an NVIDIA card, you wouldn't necessarily expect Vulkan to give you gobs more frame rate, but if you have an AMD card, Vulkan really could give you more frame rate. So I'm hoping that the Radeon 7 after Vulkan performs like a 2080 does. That's the hope. Now let's look at the 4K test here. We did see variance between the RTX cards. We got 35 frames per second on the 2060, 38 on the 2070, and 53 on the 2080. So on a single high-res display, the RTX cards do show variance, and for the most part are the bottleneck in that particular scenario. Now on the AMD cards, again, we saw significantly lower scores. 23 for the Vega 64 and 28 for the Radeon 7. So when you compare the Radeon 7 to the 2080, which is supposed to be its comparable or its rival, the Radeon 7 got about half the frame rate of the 2080. So again, hopefully Vulkan helps fix this disparity that we're seeing in X-Plane that we don't necessarily see in other games. And I know X-Plane's not a game, it's a simulator. But to the computer, it's like a game. So right now, if you want good frame rate right now, this is 1131 is what I did these tests on. You don't want a Radeon 7. I do know that 11.32 is going to give better frame rate. There was some sort of performance bug in 1131, but it's not going to make the AMD suddenly faster than these cards. It'll simply increase the frame rate a little bit across the board here. The results we see here are going to carry forward into 1132 and will only change once Vulkan, and this is in my opinion, once Vulkan is implemented and hopefully the AMD cards perform better. So again, if you want good performance right now, your best bet is an RTX card or even a GTX card from NVIDIA. And then hopefully, if you've just got to buy an AMD card because you're an AMD fan, some changes down the road will make the AMD cards more compelling. Hopefully that helps you kind of figure out some of the performance conundrums with X-Plane.